Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books, and today I'd like to talk about a set of books that I've really been wanting to talk about more in depth for a while. So these are books that deal with the topic of reproductive rights, and more specifically, all of these books touch in one way or another with the topic of abortion. I'm just labeling it under reproductive rights as to hopefully not attract trolls, and because some of these books do deal with the wider issue of reproductive rights. As a bit of an introduction, I want to let you all know that I do have a PhD in European history. My dissertation was on the French abortion movement. That's all I'm going to say about it. It's not widely available at the moment, but this is a research topic for me, as well as kind of just something that I had been interested even before I researched it at an academic level. So this topic has interested me for a long time, and I am always on the lookout for books that deal with the issue of reproductive rights, because I think one of the best ways to engage in this topic is from both a historical and a fiction perspective. I think fiction can provide a gateway into talking about what is really a very politicized topic. And what is often forgotten in these discussions is that this is people's real lives, and that these topics have a long history. So without going into a lecture, let me start talking about the books that I read in 2019 that deal with the topic of reproductive rights. All of these are excellent books, books that I think I recommend, and there I think would be many of you that would be interested in these books. Now there's different level of engagements with the topic of reproductive rights in this list. Some books are very explicit about their use of those themes, whereas other books on this list use the theme much more subtly. So that's basically what I will be emphasizing in my discussion of each of these books. So the first book on the list is a book that just does not beat around the bush. It is explicitly about the topic of abortion, and that is Girls on the Verge by Sharon. Waller. So I first heard about this book thanks to Jessie over at Jessie's Shelf. I'll link her channel down below. And this book is particularly engaging with recent state laws that have restricted access to abortion law. This one in particular, it deals with Texas and the changes that in Texas law a few years ago. So it's not the most recent stuff, but it also highlights the point that attack on reproductive rights in different states within the U.S. has been happening for a long time, pretty much since Roe v. Wade was decided on in 1971, 72. So Girls on the Verge is the story of a young girl who is pregnant, and she wants to end the pregnancy. She is trying every possible legal way to access medical care in Texas, and is finding it difficult. So she ends up going on a road trip to Mexico in her quest to end this pregnancy with two of her friends. One of her friends is against abortion for religious reasons, and so throughout this road trip they do engage in the questions of like the religious position on abortion, and the author actually deals with that with really well, never kind of making fun or totally dismissing the religious character. At the same time, though, this is a book that focuses on someone who wants to end the pregnancy. So it is very much focused on like showing that aspect and making the point that women should have a right to choose. So it is very political and overtly political in its stance. The next book I want to talk about is a book that engages with the topic of abortion in much more subtle ways, and that is The Cheerleaders by Kara Thomas. I don't think this book uses the word abortion. I would have to double check, but I don't think it ever did, because at first it's not quite clear that that's what has happened to one of the characters. But as it comes up a couple more times, and then you realize, yes, it's definitely what has happened, and with one of the characters, and she is dealing with the aftermath of an abortion. So you're not seeing her like learn about the pregnancy or making the decision. The decision has been made and action has been taken, and you're kind of seeing her struggle with a lot of different things afterwards. One of those things is a recent abortion, but without the author explicitly telling you abortion, but she gives you enough signposts that it is clearly what has happened. So while the main theme in this story is not abortion, it is within the story, and it is a plot point. What this book is focusing more on is the death of the cheerleaders in this town. Right? It's kind of a YA like mystery horror story. Several cheerleaders had passed away. One of them was the sister, older sister of our main character here. Now, years later, our main character is about the age that her sister was when she passed away, and she has a lot of unanswered questions about her sister's death and maybe a possible connection between all these deaths. So it's much more of a murder mystery, though with a lot of trigger warnings in here for violence, sexual assault, pedophilia, just a lot of dark elements in here. But if you're interested in these topics, I think it's a really good book, and so one that I would recommend for the right audience. The next book I want to talk about is Gabby, A Girl in Pieces by Isabel Quintero. Now, this is a book that engages with the topic of reproductive rights more widely. In the story, you end up with two different characters that become pregnant. One of them chooses to carry the pregnancy to full term, and one of them does not. And so it's again a book that is engaging with these topics, doing it in a more subtle way, in that this isn't a main theme, but these two different choices are emphasized within the story. And I think there is an explicit political stance here of choice, and by allowing different characters to make different choices, the author is emphasizing there's no wrong choice. People do what is right for them in their life. The reason I say that the book doesn't engage directly with these topics, even though it's clearly engaged, because the characters making these decisions are side characters rather than main characters. The story really follows Gabby, our main character, as she goes through all these life changes in her life, and as the people around her are making a lot of decisions and are going through a lot. It's a really good book, though. This is a much, I think, underhyped book. A lot of it might even be the cover, because I hate the cover. I almost didn't pick this book up because of the cover, but I think it's a really good one that a lot of people, I think, would like. Next on the list is The Farm by Joanne Ramos. And this is one of the books that I thought a lot about whether to include it in here or not, because it doesn't engage with the topic of abortion, really. It's really more about pregnancy and surrogacy. The Farm is this kind of facility where women who are carrying babies for other people are living, and they're not allowed to leave. But they've signed contracts, and it's all supposed to be done on the up and up. But I wanted to include it in here because I think what people sometimes don't realize is that reproductive rights is not just about access to abortion, although that's a big part of it. It's also access to medical care during pregnancy. And a lot of working class, poor people oftentimes don't have access to medical care they need during pregnancy. They get treated differently by doctors and nurses. Black women have a much higher rate of problems and of death with pregnancy than any other group, and I feel like that is something that activists should and are engaging with. That when we talk about reproductive rights, we're talking about class, we're talking about race, and we're talking about gender issues. This book doesn't directly engage with all of those issues, but it engages with some of them, specifically here about surrogacy and kind of the ethics behind that. And I thought it did it in a really great manner. Especially it's looking at Filipino immigrants that do a lot of child care for white Americans. So highly recommend this book as well. Next on the list is The Mothers by Brit, Bennett. This book is engaging quite directly with the topic of abortion. It's a main plot point. It's something that the main character deals with, and mostly dealing with, well, it's hard to explain without giving things away from the plot, but it does engage with both the, discovering the pregnancy, trying to make a decision of what to do, and then the aftermath of what happens after the abortion. But the author is also very clear here about what she has the character decide, right? That when the decision is made, it is very clear why, and it is a decision that the main character takes of her own volition for very clear reasons, and she is deciding, she has a choice to make, and she makes that choice, and then deals with the aftermath of that and how it affects relationships with certain people in her life. I really, really enjoyed this story. It's a lot about friendship and relationships, and it didn't feel to me like a book about abortion, but it was definitely a plot point, and it's definitely, those discussions are definitely there, and I think you can read different takes into it. I don't know that, I think that, well, all right, I think there's a discussion there about what the author is saying about abortion that is to be had. I'll put it that way. So in that way, this is a really engaging book that I think people would enjoy. The last two on my list are kind of books dealing more broadly with the issue of reproductive rights in a kind of dystopian setting. So one of the books I read in 2019 was Vox by Christina Dalcher. This is a book set in the near future where women are not allowed to speak. They're only allowed to speak a certain number of words a day, and they have in their wrists this device that if they speak more words than the allowed amount, they get sapped, right? Our main character is a scientist, and we see her reflecting back on how this world came to exist and what she does now. The issue of pregnancy and abortion does come up, but they're not main themes. This is kind of more peripheral themes. What we're mostly dealing with here is the issue of women's rights and gender stereotypes in this story, and gender dynamics. So I wanted to put that in here, but I wanted to give it a mention because the dystopian element, and because it does engage with reproductive issues at a more marginal level. And then I have to mention in here The Handmaid's Tale. I didn't reread this book in 2019, but I've read it a couple of different times, and I think it is a book that engages with the questions of reproductive rights, especially in this post-apocalyptic kind of world in which pregnancy is difficult, and how a patriarchy society taking to an extreme regulates women's reproduction. And I haven't seen the TV show yet, but it is, I enjoy reading The Handmaid's Tale. I think some of the criticisms that people have of it are quite valid, but overall I still enjoyed it, mostly because I think that Margaret Atwood is using a lot of history in this book, and I know a lot of people who have read this book and thought it just seems so implausible that something like this could happen. And what I always say is, she did not invent anything new in this story. She picked from moments in history, things that had already been done, and just put them all together. So I guess as a historian, I feel like this kind of dystopian take is not unrealistic, unfortunately. But I'm also I'm not a pessimist. I don't think we're doomed into some sort of dystopian world in which women have no rights. But that's the activist in me, and the optimist that hopes that we would be able to counteract anything like that, because in the past, like all these historical moments of extremism of limiting women's reproductive rights have occurred, and people have always fought back. People have always fought back. So one last book I want to mention, because it's on my shelves, it's on my TBR, and I just haven't gotten to it, so I can't say with absolute certainty that engages with those topics, but I've been told, from what I've heard about this book, it engages with the topic of reproductive rights, and that is Red Clocks by Leni Zumas, and I haven't read it yet. So if any of you have read it, I would love to hear a little bit of what you think without any spoilers, please. Although actually I don't even mind spoilers, but if you've read it, you can let me know if you think it's good, if it's not so good, but I do plan on getting to this book at some point, hopefully in 2020. If there are other books that you know that engage with the topic of reproductive rights, broadly, and more specifically, if you know of any other works of fiction that engage with the topic of abortion, let me know down below, because I'm always looking for works of fiction that engage with it, because I think it can be a really good conversation starter, although you don't always want to start these conversations with everybody, but anyway, if you've read any of these books, also let me know down below. This was a video that I have been meaning to make for a while. I was a little bit hesitant because, you know, I don't want to attract a bunch of trolls. Like I have an opinion. I respect other people's political opinions, but I also come to it from an academic and a historical perspective. And that's, I think, the main thing I would urge people that are wishing to engage more with these topics is to think of it more broadly and not just in like the boxes, in the political boxes that we tend to put these topics in. So that's my take. Thank you guys for watching though, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you would like to, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Social media links are down below. I am most active on Instagram and on Goodreads. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.